we talk parking, pandemics, and the road ahead. These past few weeks have been wild and challenging for all of us and for our industry, but I'm excited today to bring together some really great parking professionals from different areas of the parking industry to talk about how they are responding to the COVID-19 crisis and how they're preparing for the road ahead. Some exciting news to announce: MAPA and SWPTA have joined with NPA's coalition, Parking Stronger Together. This coalition exists for parking pros from across the industry to stand together and be strong during this time, supporting each other with information and resources. So we're excited about what NPA is doing for the industry at this time, and if you would like to learn more, please head to weareparking.org. So before we get started, just a few announcements. First and foremost, all participants have been muted during this webinar. Secondly, we have time reserved at the end for panel discussion with Q&A. So if you have any questions, please make sure to submit those through the Q&A function through Zoom. And lastly, this session is being recorded, which will be available following the webinar on www.midatlanticparkingassociation.com. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today we have 6 awesome parking pros here with us today. To get us started, I will ask them to introduce themselves. So panelists, please tell us who you are, where you work, and please give us a quick overview of how you and your organization have responded to this crisis. And so Bill, we'll kick it off with you.
Okay, I'm Bill Boyle with Federal Parking. I own Federal Parking, and I guess how we are handling this crisis is as well as possible. We are cutting down to the bone, basically preparing for, I think, a fairly long duration event. And that means cutting costs and trying to do everything we possibly can for our staff and for our clients and maintaining service through this, because believe it or not, service doesn't totally disappear even when a garage shuts down.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And Brian?
I'm Brian Simmons, Assistant Director at University of Maryland, Baltimore. I kind of piggyback on what Bill said. We've gone from our 7 garages, we've reduced to 4 garages, which is our 24-hour facilities. We've gone to a bare bones schedule. We've reduced our daily rate to a $9 max, knowing that we're going to have some surge parking with new people coming to the hospital on a daily basis, patients as well as medical staff. We've maintained an office staff of anywhere from 4 to 7 on a daily basis, which includes our maintenance staff. And that's been challenging. We're trying to be, cleaning the elevators. I don't think they've ever been cleaner. Stairwells, door handles, on a regular basis.
Thanks, Brian. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Mark Pace. I'm the manager of parking and transportation at Montgomery College for the past 12 years. I've been in the parking business for 40 years, and have, never seen anything like the times that we're at right now. Basically, Montgomery College has gone to remote instruction, closed all of its buildings and campuses at the current time, and we've canceled graduation and several other operating things where they've saved money. So the cost of graduation normally is about $400,000. They've taken that budgeted amount with about another $150,000 worth and created a fund for needy students who have been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. So as a public institution, we've been able to do some things that a lot of private businesses may not have been able to do. We reallocate that money that if we don't spend it, we're going to lose it. And they've done it to help, as well as we've had several donations to the board, to the foundation board, to help needy students as well.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Brandy, passing it on over to you.
My name is Brandy Stanley. I'm the parking manager for the city of Las Vegas, and I've never seen anything like this either. It's very, very tough to deal with. Working for a city, we don't have the option to lay employees off. So our revenue which used to be between $5,000 and $10,000 a day, is now less than 500, and we still are paying all of our employees. We'll continue to do that as long as we can, but how it comes back and how much we can stand to lose, it's going to depend on how long it goes. So we're hoping something comes back at some point, but everything's really uncertain, and that's the tough thing to deal with.
All right, thank you, Brandy. Larry?
Hello, everyone. I first want to thank Anthony and MAPPA for putting together this webinar. Support and ideas from our community during this time is critical. I want to point out in these difficult times that you need to take care of your mental health well-being and those of your staff. Everyone deals with this type of crisis and trauma in different ways. Be aware of the warning signs of unusual behavior, even over the phone, from your staff, and direct them to get help if you sense it is needed. And for all of us leading our organizations, these are the most difficult decisions that we've had to make in our career, most likely. With layoffs you would have never have anticipated, lost business, budget cuts, while also handling our changed family life at home. So from someone who has dealt with a lot of tragic situations in my career, please make sure you are able to handle the pressure of the current crisis, and if not, seek support. As far as COVID-19 response, I'm sure it has tested all of our existing emergency, continuity, and contingency plans. I run an independent municipal parking authority in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So we function just like a small business. I am making decisions that impact our organization from A to Z. I have broken this crisis, for my management of it, into 4 main areas, and we'll try to elaborate on during our webinar. And they are decisions in support of my city, human resource decisions, and mandates impacting staff, including directives from the Department of Labor, financial decisions from impact of lost revenue, as we're all dealing with, including putting on hold non-essential expenses and capital projects. And fourth, the operational impact, including closing our offices, handling only online transactions, and emergency staffing only. So I look forward to the opportunity to share those thoughts with you and help all of us be in a better place.
Thank you so much, Larry. Okay, passing it on over to Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. So Jeff Johnson with Flash Parking, the Vice President of Enterprise Sales and Solutions. I'll answer it in a couple ways. Externally, we're standing in full support of our operating partners and owners. And we saw the data in real time, both in transactional volume and revenue kind of falling off a cliff. So we were as proactive as we could be in reaching out, providing analysis perspective, any help they needed, and certainly financially. We made a lot of financial adjustments to our partners. So we're standing in support of our operating owners and operators. Internally, we're looking at it as a time to sharpen our saws. Allison Schrecken-Gass is employee number 4 for us and is our head of learning and development. She has probably put on at least 20 webinars over the past 2 or 3 weeks to train us and to get us a better understanding of all the power of our technology and our platform. Our ops and dev teams are clearing backlogs and getting to their pipelines and setting us up for maximum exit speed on the other side of this. And then our executive and leadership teams we're thinking about innovations on the other side of this. How can we come out with a more safer and more touchless environment in both valet and parks? And so finally, our sales team is doing everything they can to continue to reach out, present where we can remotely. That's something to get used to, but we've done quite a few presentations. And actually within Salesforce, our pace and touches daily activities actually kept pace and sometimes exceeded prior to COVID-19. So doing everything we can externally and internally, standing with our clients and then sharpening our saws internally.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. All right, so we're going to dive right into the questions. So first question that we have so far, what changes have happened with your staff and how have you handled those challenges? So Jeff, we'll start off with you.
Yeah, so look, I think like everyone else in the business world right now, we're finding ways to continue to be productive while working remotely. And that's a challenge. So, you know, everyone in our organization is still active, still on board, working diligently in their particular departments and disciplines, but they're having to find new ways to continue to move the needle and contribute. Again, just like everyone else on this call. I will say though, however, we're in some states we're defined as essential work, which is very fortunate. We've had some absolutely heroic efforts from some of our commissioners and employees that are out in the field installing. Just last Friday, we finished up a 30-lane install over the past 2 weeks in California, if you can believe that, in Santa Monica. We're going back to California next week for an installation. So we're extraordinarily proud of how our almost 200 employees are approaching the current business environment with positive can-do attitudes, again, supporting our client base and focusing on how to make the parking industry better post-COVID-19.
Awesome. All right, so we'll hop on over to Bill.
Okay, it's a little different for the managed garage situation because you're dependent upon your clients really for staffing decisions in many ways. So the challenge for us has been to explain to clients why they should keep staff, number one. If that's not possible, to make sure the staff gets on unemployment, gets any resources they need, or we can move them around somewhere else where we can keep them in the mix and keep them being on our payroll. It is probably the hardest challenge there is in our business right now beyond anything else. I think as Jeff can tell you, I mean, revenues went from 110% in the week before the shutdown in DC to 5%, almost overnight. DC, actually, the garages were busier than normal before the shutdown because people were avoiding mass transit. So it was really a very weird situation in that we were completely employed, everyone in needing more people. On a Thursday and on the following Monday, you're looking at 80% of your staff and saying, what are we going to do? So it's been tough. I will not sugarcoat it. It has been very hard because, of our garages, 80% are shut down completely. And that will vary depending on the garage niche that you're in. If you're doing residential, it's not the case. If you're doing certain other types of garages, it's not the case. But, all the government buildings are shut down effectively. So the big thing is care and feeding of your staff. And we are doing everything we can to connect them with resources. We are coming up with jobs for people that we can pay them on outside of our revenue stream that will help them out. We're even looking into ancillary businesses that are coming up now, like for instance, traffic direction at hospitals is something that we've been approached about, just to name one. So that in the case that there is an enormous rush, they can, there's someone who knows how to do large event direction and get people in and out of parking garages. Forget about just the garage itself. So it's really about maintaining as many people as you can on the payroll, finding things for them to do that is not even profitable, frankly, but that keeps them with a paycheck. And that's it right now until we don't really know where things are going, or we know where things are going, but we literally don't know what the timeline is going to be. And so it's triage, frankly, until that happens in the management parking side.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're all so uncertain about when this is going to end. So thank you for that, Bill. Lastly, Brian, we'll toss it on over to you.
So luckily we haven't had to lay off anyone. We've tried to be creative with assigning work to those that can work from home. We've gone as far as actually delivering those of us that go on the campus have actually delivered work to someone's garage so that they could do paperwork while at home. We've adjusted schedules knowing that there are travel limitations. You know, we do have some employees that use MTA, so we've had to be, we have the travel notices that allow them to get to work, but scheduling, like I said, we've adjusted those. We plan on a schedule through the end of April for our reduced staff. And that varies anywhere from 4 to 7 in the office. And for our contractor, that's about 22 employees a day for us to maintain those 4 facilities. We're looking at some options of sheltering in place in one of our garages that has a basement. For the hospital has put out some tents for testing of patients. If that's the expectation with the surge over the next 2 weeks coming to campus, and we would use the basement of the garage as a shelter in place during inclement weather or potential other issues. Like I said, we're averaging about 1,600 cars on campus a day. So we still have some activity. That number has decreased by 20%, about 11% from the prior week, but we're still busy. All the construction projects are still going on. We have not put a halt to any of the current projects on campus. There has been discussion that would be halted, and only essential or life safety projects would continue, but there has been no disruption to our the general contractors on campus.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, so we're gonna head on over to our second question. So how are you approaching budgets and expenses during this time? What has changed and what has stayed the same? So Mark, we'll start with you.
Well, we operate a little different being a community college. Our parking fees, well, our transportation fee, which includes a permit, covers use of county ride-on at no cost, as well as a parking permit. So we haven't done any refunds of those because that transportation fee is part of the credit hour fee. So we haven't been impacted on a revenue standpoint. On an expense standpoint, though, we have we run a campus shuttle, and obviously with buildings with all remote instruction, we've been able to cancel that, and our contract, you know, included that clause with a notice, so we're not paying any expenses for our shuttle operation currently. So there's been a savings there. And then as far as there's no reason to issue the permits, so our mailing fees are no longer impacted. So we've done things to try to save any costs that we can. And that's pretty much it at this point.
All right, thanks, Mark. Brandy, we'll pass on over to you.
I gotta say, this has probably been the most challenging thing of my entire career, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the budgeting. What it has to do is the politics with the city. The city is facing a huge problem because there's no sales tax that's happening in Las Vegas, and they're gonna feel the effects. $150 million they're projecting for next year, they're gonna have to be able to cut from their budget. So the problem is that we are an enterprise fund, so we are not reliant on the city's general fund or their revenue stream. We have our own. And it's a very, very delicate tightrope to try to exempt ourselves from the general policies that are being told to all departments. So everybody has to do a 20% expense reduction for the next fiscal year, which starts in July, which is arbitrary for us because we're losing our revenue now. It's going to come back in July, and they're not interested in the specifics of our little enterprise fund, they're seeing it from a big picture and applying the same principle across everywhere. So if I have to do that, then I have to lay off almost 30% of my staff, which is unnecessary, and there are other decisions that we could make. So really, this is a huge test of political acumen, the ability to be heard, and how to go about getting the right decision when you're not necessarily in control of it. So yes, this is going to have an effect on us, but how drastic it is really depends entirely on how we can market to the powers that be at the city that we're not the same as the general fund. So that's what I spend almost all day, every day doing right now, running numbers, trying to get people to listen. It's a unique situation, probably the most challenging one, and very, very stressful. I've never been under this much stress at work for something that really shouldn't be that much of an issue. So it's tough. It's really tough.
Okay. Thanks for sharing, Brandy. What about you, Larry? Coming from also a government entity.
Well, first, let me I empathize with Brandy, and I see the stress that you're dealing with. And as my opening comment stated, please make sure you're taking care of yourself. Okay? Please reach out however you need to. From our perspective as a small independent authority and a small, what we call third-class city, as I talked about up front, there's kind of four, I kind of put things in the four baskets. One is support of the city. So city directives kind of dictate a lot of the things, as Brandy said. This wasn't a parking issue, but we're at in some aspects, supporting the city demands and needs. So we've had to make all of our meters free parking. We've eliminated all of our enforcement. We do street sweeping, meters, and residential permit parking. We're not doing any of them right now for various reasons. Everyone's home, they can't move their vehicles. We don't want them out of their homes. So all the enforcement has been put on hold. Obviously, there's a financial impact of that. Fortunately, from an operational perspective, we are fairly well positioned. We are not giving away free parking in our garages. We're still maintaining that avenue of revenue. All of our garages are automated, so we don't have to have any staff in the garages, and we are able to do online transactions for payment of monthly parking and payment of citations. So that's good. From a staffing perspective, we've laid off all of our part-time employees. We paid them for 2 weeks, kind of as not a severance, because hopefully they're coming back. But we laid off about 45% of our staff, our part-time employees. And there could be more pending depending upon how long this goes, and none of us know exactly how long this goes. As I said before, we put on hold the majority of our operating and capital spending, unless they're emergency based. We've been fortunate. I'm in my 10th year. We've been able to build up a rainy day fund. We didn't think we'd have to spend it on labor, but we are using that rainy day fund on labor right now. And we're working on, as Brandy stated as well, we are projecting out everyone's talked about Bill said we're at 110% a week before. Now we have to start trying to project out the rest of the year and where we're going to be and what the shortfalls are going to be. And then the last point, really, as I said, as an independent authority, we're responsible for our own human resources. I tell everyone, please get a hold of, I did post it on my LinkedIn, the Department of Labor employee rights. So a lot of things have changed with, for example, FMLA was typically for organizations over 50 employees. We have under 50 employees, but now we're a part of FMLA under this crisis situation.
Thank you, Larry, and for sharing all that really important information. So we're going to jump into a next question. How do you think parking will change as we get back to normal after the crisis? So Jeff, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I kind of reserve a little bit of optimism for the immediate future, just post-COVID-19. And I think typically when you've seen large economic disruptions, and certainly this one is atypical of some of the larger ones, but you think about 9/11, you think about the financial crisis of 08 and 09, typically local travel, whether it's personal or business, is what comes back first. And so when you think about on the back end of those crises, drive-in rates actually went up and sometimes outpaced. I was an operator at the time for both of those where they were prior. So, you know, the pattern is local regional travel comes back first, whether it's business or personal. People feel more comfortable moving locally. Domestic travel within the United States comes back second, and international lags. You know, so a little optimism, I think, on the immediate side of this, on the other side of this. I do think, though, that the parking public and organizations that offer, whether it's self-park or valet park, are going to require a safer and more touchless experience than they've had in the past through both technology and operating standards. I think about the changes, you know, post 9/11 in the airline industry, and you look back at some of the processes and procedures that were in place pre 9/11, you're like, how could that ever have been, right? I think the same thing will come to the parking industry and the broader business environment, right? So it wouldn't be unheard of to think that temperature checks will be required to board a plane or sporting events or mass gatherings. Applying to parking, would it be unheard of to think that parking associates and valet might have to take and register their temperature before starting a shift? Could it be that tickets go away, any interaction with the kiosk? So moving completely to some sort of Bluetooth connected cars, other forms of touchless payments. And again, I'm not saying all these things will happen. What I am saying is that you'll look back on the changes in the industry and go, I can't believe, or it's interesting we actually operated that way prior. We're spending a lot of time organizationally thinking about what those innovations are. Finally, I think that the need to define the function of a parking asset and how it's used to optimize its return, I think that'll be accelerated. I think the assets need to become more resilient in the event of an economic crisis, and that comes from a diversification of use cases and revenue streams. And I think that'll accelerate. I think that's had started somewhat on the front end of this, and going back to 19, I think it'll accelerate on the other side of this.
Yeah, Jeff, that's some really good insight. Brandy, we'll toss on over to you.
I think I agree with Jeff. I think people may very well retreat into their own vehicles. I'm curious to see whether or not Uber and Lyft and rideshare picks up at the same pace it had before. People have more of a sense of security and control if they're in their own vehicle rather than entrusting that to someone else or being in close proximity to another car that maybe 50 other people have been in. There may be some sensitivity to that. I also agree that interstate and international travel is going to be much slower to resume. That's especially concerning here in Las Vegas. Obviously, we have like 40, 50 million tourists a year, and that's going to take a while to come back. But I also agree with Jeff that, you know, sort of a touchless experience, frictionless, people are going to be more open to that. So while they're probably not thinking about it at this point, the parking industry has been working really, really hard to develop touchless, frictionless, non-attended parking. And in some cases, it really doesn't work, and the consumers have been slow to adopt it. That may change. So we may be able to make some of those changes as an industry because the consumers may be more ready for them. So it will be interesting to see whether or not that happens, and then obviously how quickly and in what form our business comes back, because it will come back. It's just a matter of how long it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up such a good point with the frictionless. That's always been such a big buzzword in our industry. So it will be interesting to see how we are able to truly make our industry frictionless, right? So then, Bill, if you want to wrap up on this question.
Yeah, I think all those points about technology are excellent. I mean, if you look at any crisis, any war, and this is frankly on the level of a war, any large crisis in American history, technology always responds to it and always leaps ahead. So I think that is definitely the case. I think what that will turn off of is the question of physical intimacy. I think the valet business is going to be very different. I think it will never be what it was relative to what it was a month ago after this. I think there'll be, people will have a real problem with that. I think it will also affect mass transit to a great degree. We were already seeing before the lockdowns, people were not taking mass transit. They were all parking in our parking garages. I had formerly slow garages that were overwhelmed on the Thursday before everything shut down. So I think that, and again, sporting events, event parking, you know, I hate to break it to people, and I've been a real downer for everybody in the events business recently, but it is highly unlikely that you will have attended football games in September. It is very highly unlikely. So I think that where we're going in the parking industry is towards the technological barrier, effectively, that lowers things. And I don't know if I've traveled in Asia a fair amount, and often in an airport in Asia, you get a temperature check as you land. When there's nothing going on. I was in Cambodia and Vietnam last year and landed, and they checked our temperatures. That's with no pandemic at all. I think it'll be very common to see that going forward in the United States at a certain point. I also think that you'll see the very structure of how people make money change, in that events parking is going to take a long time to come back. Valet is never going to be the same again. And I think mass transit people are pushed away from mass transit, at least for a while, into parking garages. I think that's where things are headed. I think you'll see street spaces where you can pay with a credit card pickup. But again, I think it's the question of physical intimacy. I think this is going to leave a cultural mark that is going to accelerate where the technology was already going. And I think the description of pre-9/11 and how airports were, I think this will have at least as much of an effect as that did on the future and how people interact just generally.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Okay, going on to our next question. How are you and your organization preparing for the future as drivers return to parking? And Bill, if you want to kick this one off.
Okay. We are basically going into where we can't operate, we're going to hibernation mode. In other words, maintaining facilities, making sure that things are clean, that they are still, even if there's no one in the garage, that all the regular garage maintenance is happening, and even beyond that, doing extra cleaning. We are keeping staff who, were folks that we had to lay off because management companies, we get told to close a garage. We're staying very closely in touch with everybody that does not work with us right now, but did. We are really trying to be absolutely ready that if you call me tomorrow, no problem, I'll staff your garage with the same staff, same people, same quality of service. I think that because it's hard to say when this is going to come to some sort of end, it's hard to do that. But I think that there are going to be tons of opportunities at the back end where organizations have a really hard time standing themselves up again. And that's the number one thing that you need to be thinking about right now. It will be different in different states. If you look at the IHME data on state by state for how this epidemic is progressing, there's going to be states where things come back relatively quickly. And if not ready to do the business when things come back, somebody else will be.
Absolutely. Okay, Brian, you want to ask a question?
We've been, hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry. We've been constantly maintaining the facilities that are open, and when time allows, we've gone into the closed ones, just checking on lights and, doing little prep. But that's the goal is when, we're looking maybe a 48-hour notice would take us to mobilize our staff to open the other 3 facilities. One of our issues is we are a primary cashiers are in every facility. So looking for us, technology going forward and going to a touchless, frictionless system is something we're probably going to have to entertain. Knowing that there's stress, there will be stress of people coming back to work. hesitation dealing with customers, touching tickets, and just being sensitive to what happened over this period. We have, like I said earlier, maintained our campus projects. So we have a graphics package going on in one of the facilities. Customers will come back and we'll see that. Again, it's just for us reevaluating some of our processes and procedures, especially on the cleaning and maintenance side for us.
All right, and then Mark, how about from your perspective?
I think from my perspective, you know, having the parking and transportation hat both, I look at transportation taking a longer time to come back, and do think that we'll have more cars on campus. You know, so we're in a situation now, at least on 2 of our 3 campuses, that we have a surplus of parking, so that won't stress our loads. One of the campuses, it may be a little more critical looking at obtaining additional parking, as it could take, it could stress the load that we have there. And I think everywhere it's going to be important to keep the elevator lobbies and stairwell handrails and things for the patrons to see a greater attention to detail on cleaning those. Also, you know, as Larry had mentioned earlier, I want to thank Anthony for his work on the webinar and all of them, and he's done a fantastic job for us. And I currently serve as the board president of the Mid-Atlantic Parking Association, and I want to thank each of you for being here and for all the panelists as well. It's a time that, as we've all said, that none of us have ever seen before, and we can just continue to learn and support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. And Larry, we'll wrap it up with you on this question.
Okay. Well, obviously there's going to be pent-up demand in some areas, and there's going to be incredible challenges in other areas. It's all going to be the new normal. We don't come out of any crisis without a new normal, right? I think some of the questions from a business perspective that we all need to think about is, I know we think they're going to come back, but will they come back? Will they come back at the levels that they have before? And will remote access to work be more the norm than it was before? Will businesses look at, you know what, I can cut office space, I can cut parking costs? Are businesses trying to survive going to make these types of decisions that are going to ripple down to us and have impact on us? And I think we need to think about that and be aware of that. From a pent-up demand perspective, I think, at least in our town where we have an abundance of restaurants, I anticipate there'll be a surge in demand for restaurants. I mean, people will be dying to actually sit in a restaurant versus sitting in your car and doing pickup and talking to your friend in the car next to them, right? Which I've done a couple times, and I've gotten a lot of shirts dirty from it too. So we'll look forward to the time where you can actually sit in a restaurant, engage with folks, go to a sporting event again. But, you know, we're all going to have to recalculate our budgets. I think we're going to need to be conservative in our approach, and we're going to, you know, have to anticipate this new norm and what the ripple impact of it is and how long it will be and at what point we'll get back to normal. I have bonds that I have, bondholders that I have to answer to. Not being able to pay our bonds is not really an answer that you want to give. So we just have to, you know, deal with the tragedy, make smart decisions. And as I said up front, please take care of yourself, your staffs, take care of your mental health well-being. Please reach out to me on the side if you need any support in those areas as well. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry. And I personally am looking forward to going back to some of those restaurants in Lancaster. You guys have some really good restaurants there. So hopefully those days will come soon. So we're going to open it up now for Q&A. These questions have been submitted through our chat. So, and you can go ahead and keep them coming. So to start, our cameras have a long time when monitoring remotely. Do any of you know of a camera solution that can be remotely monitored in real time? So I'll let whichever panelist go ahead and take this one. And let me know if you'd like me to repeat it too.
Wow, sounds like you got us stumped on that one.
Happy to follow up with that caller though individually and provide some direction on that and some resource.
As a private operator, I mean that I go way out of my way to never have to monitor a camera ourselves if we can possibly avoid it.
And we do, contrary to Bill, we do monitor. We have a fairly significant camera system in our garages just to make sure that, you know, catching every entry and exit point in the garages, catching every major pedestrian pathway area, elevators, primarily to minimize vandalism, breaking of gates, things of that nature. Obviously an LPR aspect of that, so we can actually go after folks and charge them for the damage that they have done.
All right, and this next question is for Bill. Does Federal have any lease locations? If yes, how are you handling these locations?
That would be a Ray and Fusey question, wouldn't it? So we do have some lease locations, although that's not the core of our business. I feel very badly for people who are primarily lease location operators because this is a really, really rough time for everybody. You know, and the way that we're handling it is working it out individually with each lease. We're going to them and saying, how do you want to work this out? And there are many ways in which that does work out. Everything from, we're not going to pay you this month, and I'm not saying individually what ours are, but here are all the options that you typically have. You don't pay, for every month you don't pay, you add a month at the end of the contract. They call that the Italian model these days. There are, I'll pay you, amortize it over the rest of the contract for however many months I don't pay right now. There is write the check and the hell with it. That's the way it goes. And I got to tell you, I think there's a lot of people who are thinking about walking away from leases. I don't think very many are being paid in the sort of normal way right now. This is one of those times, and it's funny, my father's 90 years old and remembers the Depression. And what he always says is that what people didn't do then and what they need to do now is be willing to work with each other and look in the long term. Because if someone walks away from a lease right now, right, there's no way that lease value is going to be the same thing 3 months from now or 6 months from now, maybe a year from now. But no one helps anybody by playing hardball in these situations. You know, operators have to do everything they possibly can, and owners have to think in the long run, how do they get the best return beyond, okay, you're out and we'll just look for someone else to do it. So in our situation, it's working out pretty well. There's a lot of, you know, we have a lot of very long-term clients, so we can do long-term solutions for these. But leases are tough, and I've talked to some operators in this market who I think have a lot of sleepless nights right now. Luckily, I'm not in that world very much, so I'm okay. But it's tough. It's a very, very tough situation, and I think in the end, people will mostly be reasonable with each other purely out of self-interest because it's the right thing to do.
If you guys don't mind, I'd like to actually answer that, because even though we're the city, we actually have I think I have over 20 lease locations where I lease surface lots from private property owners. And one of the things that we did when we structured those leases is I only have one out of the 20 that has a base rent, guaranteed base rent. All the rest of them are based on percentage of gross revenues. So we have almost no exposure on our leases at this point because we structured them that way. So we actually, the owners made out better in the high times because they were taking a bigger percentage. but we were almost able to completely eliminate our risk in a time like this by doing a percentage of gross revenue lease. So for anyone who is thinking about entering into lease agreements or restructuring them, that's definitely something to think about. You may make more in the boom economies, but when it crashes, you're going to have some trouble, like Bill was saying.
Yeah. And this next question is for Brandy. Brandy mentioned high stress as the situation is being managed. What methods have you found to relieve stress, not only for yourself, but for your staff as well? Has anyone had any local or community support to reduce stress and support everyone during this difficult time that has helped and may be of assistance to others?
To be honest, it's been pretty lonely, just because our city government, this is not our finest hour. So things are changing by the minute and by the second. And my primary focus is to really shield my staff from all of the turmoil that's going on and allow them to process this in their own way, and keep them working as much as possible. And I don't tell them a whole lot. I try to keep it away from them, which puts a lot of burden on the city, on the management, but it's the right thing to do. Resources are kind of tough right now, so we'll get through it, but it's really not going to be easy.
All right, so opening it back up to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
But I think it is a time to, in the time of uncertainty, the level of uncertainty you're feeling, your staff's probably feeling it tenfold, because probably uncertainty about their jobs and of that nature. So it's really a time to come together and to share what you feel is pertinent information, at least on a weekly basis. I think, the uncertainty and the unknown is a lot more troublesome than at least getting some information of what the potential reality is.
Thank you, Larry. All right, opening it back up to the panel. Do you think rideshare could be a wash? Pre-COVID-19, people choosing personal vehicle versus rideshare will choose personal vehicle post-pandemic, but will mass transit users in large metropolitan areas, such as New York City, will now prefer rideshare?
I might take a stab at that, if it's all right. So I think it depends on, I think it's a great question. I think it depends on what changes are made in each industry, right? And if you're just solely basing the response on conditions as they exist today in an Uber, yes, I'd probably take my personal vehicle more than I take Uber. But if there's if Uber and Lyft and the TNCs exhibit leadership and look for ways to make their environment safer and for the consumer to have more confidence in it, same with public transportation, same with our industry, right? I think anybody that comes out on the backside of this operating the same way that they did going into it is not going to come out ahead. They need to think about things differently and innovate. And so depending on how the TNCs and public transportation and the other industries that are out there respond, I think that's how you would answer that question. It's a great question.
One thing I would add is that I don't think that the business model for Uber, Lyft, et cetera, was working all that well before. So I'm curious how viable they're going to be as entities after this. And I think that you may see that regionalization break out in that business. Again, if you go to Vietnam, there's a local version of Uber effectively that makes tons of money. And I think that where you'll probably see a balkanization, as the business is not going to be what it was. People are going to have different mores and attitudes, as Jeff pointed out, depending on where they are and how their local Uber drivers react and what changes are made. So I think that there might be a pretty seismic change in that entire market, just because people in a city in DC might be fine with using Uber, but You know, in Arizona, maybe not. In Manchester, New Hampshire, maybe not. I don't think it was a really well-designed financial sector in the first place, or design, I should say, of the business. And I'm really curious if it survives as sort of a national entity.
But also with public transportation, there's a lot of people that don't have a choice. So that area of public transportation is going to come back. And you'll see right now with all of the lockdowns, public transportation's shutting back down to the bare minimums. And so it does impact people that need to try to get out, that have no other option, that are forced to work or whatever. It is impacting their ability to get around. So that's one thing that's hard to really quantify at this point, because there's no exact number as to how many people have no other option but to take public transportation.
Yeah, such a good point, Mark. And this next question is a follow-up to Jeff's answer. What specific changes do you think people need to be made aware of?
Sorry, so what, it's a follow-up to my answer?
Yeah, the question came in follow-up to Jeff's answer. What specific changes do you think people need to be made aware of?
Specific changes in which industry? I'm sorry, I just need more specifics.
Rideshare.
Oh, rideshare. Again, I don't know what specific changes come out of how they look at the environment post-COVID-19. So, so I probably don't have a whole lot of perspective there.
Okay, next question that came in. Larry addressed this briefly, but does anyone project long-term or lasting reductions in work commuting via personal vehicle as a result of this, given a possibility employers and employees may continue to prefer telecommuting?
I mean, just go ahead, Bill.
I would say, as far as my experience in DC, which has a great metro system, and it's convenient and it's fast and it's not too expensive, riding was going up in personal vehicles before this hit. I think if anything, that's what you'll see, is that you'll see more personal vehicle driving, at least initially. I think it's also easier for people to feel that a metro has been cleaned versus a rideshare that they don't know necessarily who's been in it, who's cleaned it, or anything else. So I think it'll kind of go in that order. I think personal vehicles will boom, frankly. And I think that people will go to work, because I got to tell you something, that 8-year-old in there, I wouldn't mind going to work 40 hours a week to get a break or two. So.
But I think from a business decision, just to elaborate on my initial comments, I think we all need to be thinking kind of worst case scenario from a budgeting perspective, but being conservative and seeing what the impact is. And knowing that some of the businesses out there, the smaller businesses that may be struggling to get back on their feet, this might be one of the easy ones for them. Like, hey, we've been doing it this way. And this is, as every business in the country is looking at, what are ways that we can reduce our expenses to survive. If they feel that they've been able to survive this way with telecommuting, maybe that's an opportunity for them to reduce office space and reduce parking costs. So I'm hopeful that that doesn't happen. We're all hopeful that that doesn't happen. I just always like to kind of plan, at least plan for the worst case scenario, and be hopefully surprised that it doesn't play out that way.
Yeah, plan for the worst, hope for the best is really the name of the game right now, it sounds like. So the next question is for Jeff. If a parks manufacturer like Flash integrated monitors to measure the driver's body temperature upon entry to the parking structure, would there be similar liability concerns as there are with monitoring cameras throughout the garage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think what'll be fascinating on the other side of this crisis is what rights or concerns do we have today that we might sacrifice a little bit on the other side? I think that always happens, right? That's exactly what happened after 9/11. whereas it comes down to civil liberty questions and moving the dial left or right on those. So today, yeah, that may not, certain solutions may not be possible. Tomorrow, as the public changes their view, as governments look at how to reopen and how to make things safer, you may have different standards. So again, similar to how I answered it with Uber and public transportation. In today's environment, yes, I do think there's probably a concern there. And tomorrow, I think, who knows? I think that changes post-COVID-19.
Thank you, Jeff. And we're approaching the end of the webinar, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the Q&A. I wanted to thank all of our panelists for participating today. We've had such insightful and informative conversation, and I appreciate everyone's thoughtful answers. So if you do have further questions and want to continue the conversation, please reach out to the panelists. Their contact information should be up on the screen, and you can find them all on LinkedIn. And as we wrap up, on behalf of MAPA and SWPTA, I want to thank you all for attending. Please watch out for our post-webinar survey and provide your feedback to continue to provide, or so that we may continue to provide valuable content throughout the rest of the year. Stay safe and healthy out there, everyone.
Thank you. Everybody have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be strong, everyone. Are we staying or leaving?
We can all jump off. Thanks, everyone.